The most extreme survival stories in history. Okay, so I need you to think about the hardest thing you've ever been through. Whatever comes to mind. A bad breakup, a tough year, a flight with no Wi-Fi. And I say this with respect, it does not compare. Because there are people in the historical record who faced conditions so completely, catastrophically impossible that every single law of probability said they should not have survived. Not probably wouldn't, should not. And they did. Let's get into it. Vesna Vulovic. The year is 1972. You are Vesna Vulovic, a 22-year-old flight attendant for Yugoslav Airlines. You are working a routine flight. Somewhere over Czechoslovakia, a bomb planted in the cargo hold detonates. The plane breaks apart at 10,160 meters, roughly 33,000 feet above the ground, the altitude at which most commercial aircraft cruise, the altitude from which no human being has ever survived a freefall without a parachute. She was found inside a section of the fuselage that had partially cushioned her fall into a snow-covered mountainside in what is now the Czech Republic. She had a fractured skull, 3 broken vertebrae, 2 broken legs. She was temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. She was in a coma for 27 days. She had absolutely no memory of the fall, and then she recovered. She walked again. She went back to work for Yugoslav Airlines. When asked in interviews if she was afraid of flying after falling from 33,000 feet with no parachute, she said no, she was more afraid of taking the bus. Vesna Vulovic holds the Guinness World Record for the highest fall survived without a parachute, a record that has stood for over 50 years. And the physics of why she survived, the combination of the fuselage structure, the snow slope angle, the exact way her body was positioned, is something scientists and aeronautical engineers still study today, because it is, by every measure, something that should have been impossible. Hiroo Onoda. The year is 1945. World War II ends. Japan surrenders. Soldiers all over the world lay down their weapons and go home. Except one. Hiroo Onoda was a Japanese intelligence officer stationed on the island of Lubang in the Philippines. When the war ended, his commanding officer was dead, and no formal orders reached him. And because Onoda had been trained to believe that surrender was unthinkable, that the war would continue no matter what, he did the only thing his training allowed him to do. He kept fighting. For 29 years. Alone in the Philippine jungle, he survived on bananas, coconuts, and cattle he hunted in the forest. He engaged in skirmishes with Philippine police and civilians he believed were enemy combatants. He ignored leaflets dropped from aircraft telling him the war was over. He assumed they were enemy propaganda. He outlasted 3 fellow soldiers who either surrendered or were killed over the years until he was completely alone. One man, one jungle. 29 years of a war that had ended before most people watching this video were born. It was not until 1974 that a Japanese explorer named Norio Suzuki tracked Onoda down in the jungle and told him the truth. Onoda refused to believe it until his original commanding officer flew to the Philippines and personally delivered the order to stand down. Only then did Hiroo Onoda emerge from the jungle, lay down his rifle, and accept that the war had been over for 29 years. He was 52 years old. He had spent more of his adult life fighting a finished war in a jungle than he had spent living in peace. Scientists and psychologists who study human belief and cognitive dissonance point to Onoda's story as one of the most extreme documented examples of the human mind's ability to reject reality entirely when reality conflicts with deeply held conviction, which is either remarkable or terrifying. Probably both. Aron Ralston. The year is 2003. You are Aron Ralston, an experienced solo hiker and mountaineer in the canyons of Utah. You are 27 years old. You know what you are doing. You have been hiking alone in remote terrain for years without incident. On April 26th, you are descending a narrow slot canyon called Blue John Canyon when an 800-pound boulder shifts and pins your right hand against the canyon wall. You are alone. You told nobody where you were going. You have a small amount of water and some food, and you cannot move the rock. For 5 days, Aron Ralston remained trapped in that canyon. He rationed his water until it ran out. He carved his name and what he believed was his date of death into the canyon wall. He filmed video messages to his family on his camera. He tried everything, chipping at the rock, attempting to rig a pulley system with his climbing gear, pushing until he had nothing left. The rock did not move. On the 5th day, facing certain death from dehydration, Aron Ralston made a decision that is almost impossible to comprehend sitting here comfortably watching a video. He broke the bones in his forearm against the canyon wall. And then, using a cheap multi-tool with a blade so dull it could barely cut rope, he amputated his own arm below the elbow, without anesthesia, without help, alone in a canyon where nobody knew he was. He then rappelled down a 65-foot drop, one-armed, hiked 5 miles through the desert, and was found by a family of hikers who called for rescue. He was airlifted to hospital, treated, and survived. He later said the moment he made the decision to amputate felt not like despair, but like relief, like the only clear thought he'd had in 5 days. Psychologists who study extreme survival scenarios use Ralston's account as a case study in what they call survival mode cognition, the brain's ability to override every normal emotional and physical response to pain in order to execute what it has identified as the only path forward. He wrote a book about it. He went back to hiking. He climbed again with one arm. Ernest Shackleton. The year is 1914. Ernest Shackleton, a British explorer, sets out with a crew of 27 men on an expedition to cross Antarctica on foot. It will be the first land crossing of the continent. It will be historic. It will be absolutely nothing like what actually happens. Before the expedition even reaches the Antarctic continent, their ship, the Endurance, becomes trapped in pack ice in the Weddell Sea. They wait. The ice does not release them. For 10 months, the Endurance drifts, locked in ice, as the crew lives aboard and waits for a thaw that never comes. And then, in October 1915, the ice crushes the ship entirely. The Endurance sinks. 28 men are now stranded on a floating ice shelf in the most remote and hostile ocean on Earth, with no ship, no radio contact with the outside world, and no realistic prospect of rescue. What Shackleton does next is considered by historians and survival experts to be one of the greatest feats of leadership and human endurance ever documented. He keeps the crew alive through an Antarctic winter on the ice. When the ice floe begins to break apart, he launches 3 small lifeboats, salvaged from the Endurance, and sails them, in open ocean, in conditions that regularly kill vessels many times their size, to a tiny, uninhabited island called Elephant Island. The first time any of the men had stood on solid ground in 497 days. But Elephant Island is not on any shipping route. No rescue will ever come. So Shackleton takes 5 men, gets back into one of the small boats, a 22-foot wooden lifeboat called the James Caird, and sails 1,300 kilometers across the Drake Passage, widely considered the most dangerous stretch of ocean on the planet. In a wooden boat the size of a large dining table, in winter, it takes 16 days. They make it to South Georgia Island, and then Shackleton and 2 men cross the island's unmapped mountain range on foot, without proper equipment, without maps, without sleep, to reach a whaling station on the other side. The first humans ever to cross that terrain. He then organized 4 separate rescue attempts to retrieve the men left on Elephant Island. The 4th one succeeded. Every single one of the 28 men who set out on the Endurance expedition survived. Not one death. Historians who study leadership under crisis conditions call the Shackleton expedition the definitive case study in how one person's refusal to give up can keep an entire group of people alive. Scientists studying human psychological resilience still reference Shackleton's methods over a century later. He held his crew together through 2 years of complete catastrophe with no loss of life, which is genuinely one of the most staggering things a human being has ever pulled off. Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Last one. And I want to be careful with this one because it involves real tragedy and real loss at enormous scale. The year is 1945. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is a 29-year-old naval engineer working in Hiroshima on a business trip for Mitsubishi. On the morning of August 6th, he is walking to work. At 8:15 a.m., the United States drops the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare on Hiroshima. Yamaguchi is approximately 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, close enough that the blast ruptures both his eardrums, temporarily blinds him, and burns his upper body severely. He survives. He spends the night in Hiroshima. The next day, with his wounds bandaged, he boards a train back home, to his family, to safety. He arrives on August 8th. On the morning of August 9th, he reports to work at the Mitsubishi offices in his home city to give his incident report, still bandaged, still recovering, and is in the middle of telling his supervisor about the single bomb that destroyed an entire city when the windows blow in. The ceiling comes down. The second atomic bomb has just been dropped on Nagasaki, the city where he lives, the building he is standing in. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived both atomic bombings. He lived to be 93 years old. He was the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as a survivor of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, though researchers believe as many as 165 others may have also experienced both blasts. He spent much of his later life as an anti-nuclear activist, giving testimony about what he witnessed. Scientists and statisticians have calculated the probability of surviving both bomb blasts as functionally incalculable. The combination of distance, shelter, timing, and sheer chance required at each location makes it one of the most extraordinary coincidences of survival ever recorded. He called himself the unluckiest lucky man in history, and he was right on both counts. If this video gave you chills even once, give it a like and subscribe to Whaitwhat because we've got so much more coming every single week. Check out the video on screen right now for more stuff like this. And as always, wait, what?